Deb Hoekstra here from Bee-Bug Studios, and in this video today I'm going to show you how I like to color with the new Blendabilities markers from Stampin' Up! So a couple things first. I'm going to be using this image from the Bloom with Hope Hostess exclusive stamp set from the 2014-2015 catalog. And one thing that you need to know is that if you're going to be using the Blendabilities markers, they are an alcohol ink marker. So if you're using those, you need to be using a water-based ink to stamp your image. And Stampin' Up! Recommends this Memento Tuxedo Black ink. Works beautifully with the Blendabilities markers. The other thing you need to know is that the Very Vanilla or Whisper White cardstock is best to use with the markers. It gives you the best results. So with that, we'll get started. I've already stamped my image. I didn't figure you needed to see that. I'm going to be using the Cherry Cobbler markers and two of the Daffodil Delight markers to be coloring my images. And as you can see, the markers are like a rectangular barrel, and that prevents the markers from rolling. There are two tips. There is a like a narrow tip and then the brush tip, just like our water-based markers. They've got pictures on the barrels, and they've also got lines on the barrels so you know which you're using. To start with, I'm going to color in the flower centers with a yellow, and notice here I'm just coloring over the whole center, and I'm using a circular motion. Always replace your lids when you're done. Now I want to add a little shading, and you won't be able to see this real well on the flower centers, but you always start with the lightest color first, so that's why I'm starting with the Daffodil Delight. When I get to the red, you'll see the shading more. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to add just a hint of the shading along that side there. And you can see, especially on this one, you can see the color difference there. And then finally, I'm going to go back over that whole area with my light yellow, and I'm going to blend the two together. Okay? So we'll get started with the Cherry Cobbler. Now, there are many different ways to use Blendabilities. Each person has their own style. When I was first introduced to Blendabilities, the person told me, add all your dark shading, then go back and add your medium, and then add your light. And that didn't work very well for me. I didn't like the result I got with that. So this is how I do it. I treat it like watercoloring. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to color this whole image. I'm going to go over it with my lightest Cherry Cobbler red marker. So you see here, I'm not worrying about covering it entirely. And you'll notice here how I'm leaving some white space. I'm not filling that in. And when, as you'll see as I work on, as I go to color the color, when it dries, it will actually look lighter there because of that white space. So I'm again going to do that here. I'm going to just kind of fill it in, but I'm not going all the way out to the edge on this flower. Sometimes you can. I'm going to be doing another video where I'm going to show you how to go all the way out to the edge. On this one, I'm not going to go out to the edge here. And then here is this one here I am going to color in because it's just a little bud and I'm not worried about the shading. So that is the first step. Okay, I've got my base layer on, and I think this base layer, the reason I think it works for me is it's kind of like that when you watercolor and you season the paper with water. I think it makes the absorption of the subsequent layers of color, I think it aids in that. So the next color I'm going to do, so I did light all over, kind of like a color wash all over. Now I'm going to move to my dark Cherry Cobbler. And I'm going to add my shading. Now, quite often in the Stampin' Up! Stamped images, they've already done some of the work for you. You can see where the darker areas and the lighter areas are. So I'm going to just go over, I know my darkest area here is going to be in the flower center. So I'm just going to add my darker color right around that center area. And again here, I know it's going to be around that center area. So, and you don't even have to add very much, like so, okay? And actually on this card, that's all I'm going to do with the dark. Now this is a small image, so it's real easy to color both of these and have the ink blend. If you had a bigger image, you would want to color a smaller section at a time so that your ink doesn't dry and get set too quickly on you. But this is a smaller image, so I can just do it all at once. So now I'm going to take my next darkest cherry cobbler marker, which is the medium. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the dark that I've already colored, and then I'm going to follow some of these shading lines and just bring some color out. So in other words, I'm going to blend over this, and you can see here how I've colored over the dark into what I've already colored in the light, and you probably can see that shading grade there. So, and then I'm going to kind of follow that dark line there, and then it's just a matter of, see how I'm coloring over, and then every once in a while I'm following their shading lines and I'm going out. But the idea of the blendabilities, why they're called blendabilities, is because you're blending them. And if you've ever colored with colored pencil, and you know how you color a base layer and then you go over the base layer with another, and you'll hear some squeaking, that's very normal. You go over the base layer with another color. That's kind of what you're doing here, only you're going over the base layer with the same color, just a different shade. So there I've got my dark and my medium all blended together. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my lighter color, and then I'm going to color over the whole image. So that includes, I'm going to start here on the dark, and I'm going to work out to the tip, and this time I'm going to color all the way over, even the areas that I left white. And if my camera's shaking, I'm sorry. Trying not to wiggle the table with my coloring. And you'll hear it squeak. So Stampin' Up! Sells these pens in packs of 3, a light, medium, dark, and they have 12 different colors that they sell them in. One of the colors in the pack is true to their Stampin' Up! Ink and paper, and then the other 2 are just lighter shades. So there you see, and I think you can already see how some of this is lighter and then this is darker, and you can kind of see the shading as I'm coloring over it, and you will be soaking through the paper, as you can see, so you want to make sure that you have something under your paper so it's not going to go through to your work surface. So now I'm going to do this little flower. Again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start in the center. I'm going to color over the dark and the medium and the first base of light that I've already done. And I'm just going to color. I know it's kind of hard. My hand might be in the way. So, and if you get harsh lines between the shades of color, the way to remedy that is just to keep coloring and coloring and coloring. It's kind of counterintuitive, but if you remember that you're layering colors, you will know that that's the way to get rid of those lines. You're just putting more and more and more color on. So the other thing I want to let you know is when you get done with your marker, make sure that your marker clicks and you get the lid on the whole way. These are alcohol markers, so you want the lids to fit tight so the alcohol doesn't evaporate. So the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use an old olive here, and I'm just going to lightly, and for this I'm not really coloring, I'm just kind of using a sketching motion with my hand. So I'm going to add a little bit of green here to these leaves, and then there my image is done. One thing I want to say about this is that it takes a while for all of the ink to totally absorb and saturate into the cardstock. So if you get done coloring an image and you really don't like the way it looks, give it a few minutes to sit and absorb, and go back to it in about 10 minutes or so before you make any changes to it. And then one last thing I forgot to show you what I like to do. Once I get it all blended like this, I like to take my darkest marker and go back and just kind of go over some of those darker areas. And you see, it's not like I'm coloring. I'm just kind of re-emphasizing some of those darker areas in the flower, and that just kind of brings that dark, it pops it up again. So that is how I color. I want to just show you, here's an image that has sat for a while and the ink has absorbed, and I just want to point out here how right around the tip edges here, I don't know if you can see it in the camera or not, maybe I'll hold it a little closer. You can see how it is lighter, and I did that exactly the same way with leaving that white space. So that's how I color with blender pens.